You do all the snatching, but this time you got your shit snatched.
What's good, everybody? What's good? It's your boy Cardinal Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me, and we are back for another one. Alright, y'all. Let's get this topic done real quick, like. Abandoned ship. Terence Crawford negotiations dropped by Errol Spence Jr., Fox, PBC. Alright, y'all, so on the carousel of boxing negotiations, that is the Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford undisputed super fight. What is now going on? Well, reports have come out today that Team Spence, Fox Sports, PBC, they've had enough. It is now coming to the end of the line. The train stops here. Get off the bus. Then it's been a ridiculous process since this fight was announced the first time. I don't know why it's only like this well, I understand why it's like this, and it's mainly like this in boxing. It's because the money dictates everything in this sport. How much are these fights really worth? How much are these fights really worth to the fighters, to the promoters, to the promotional companies? And when it comes down to dollar signs, it can become a problem to put mega events together when there isn't one entity controlling the whole sport. This is the one sport, I think, in the world that there isn't one entity just controlling the whole sport. The UFC is its own entity. They don't have 6 or 7 or 8 different promoters. They don't have all of these contracts they have to deal with. They don't have all these different television companies that they have to deal with. So it's easier for them to bring fights together, and even what would be considered super fights in their genre of combat sports. Now in boxing, it's almost like they're not all independent, but it's like you're dealing with a bunch of independent artists, and everybody has their own way of doing things. Everybody has a certain amount of money they want to make. Everybody has a certain network or promoter that they deal with. And, there are very few true independents in the world of boxing. Boots is one, or was one. I haven't checked to see if he signed a actual deal yet. Terence Crawford is independent somewhat at the moment. I'm not sure if he's still contractually obligated to anything with Bob Arum or ESPN. Now, I know people are saying he's a true free agent, but he's not truly free of that contract until this lawsuit is done. Because once they do go to court, best believe lawyers on both sides will be digging deeply into this contract, and there's no telling what Bob Arum's side is going to find. There's no telling what Terence Crawford's side is going to find. So, I don't know what he's contractually still obligated to when it comes to Top Rank and ESPN. But, at this point, I don't blame Spence. I made a video about this about a week ago, 4 or 5 videos ago, that he needs to be thinking about moving on and perhaps negotiating with somebody else, maybe Pacquiao, maybe Boots, maybe Virgil. There are a few other fighters out there, that he could actually make another fight with. Besides Terence Crawford, Keith Thurman, but they're not as big as the Crawford fight, other than the Pacquiao fight. But I think the Boots fight would do him well. The Boots fight would really make boxing fans happy. Although the Boots fight doesn't come with their dollar amounts that the Terence Crawford or the Pacquiao fight would come with. What does this mean at this point? What is, how do you view, and I'm asking the people who actually watch my videos all the way through, because I know it's very few of them, but most people, they come, they watch a few minutes, they comment, and then they make a comment about something and they didn't even watch the full statement, so they'll make an off-putting comment, and I don't even usually respond to them, but you gotta watch the whole video, man. How do you guys feel, or how would you guys feel about Terence Crawford if at the end of this process, when it's finally announced, yay or nay, that he held out for a rematch clause, or let's say he held out because he didn't get the type of testing he wanted, or let's say he held out for a referee, or because I think they solved the problem of the purse by now. I wouldn't think that they're still arguing over the purse, but if they're still arguing over the purse, it's basically what I've been saying, that there's not enough money involved into the fight to make the fight on both sides. I think, it could be a problem of they're paying Errol Spence too much and Bud is jealous. I think he's always been jealous of Errol Spence since Errol Spence started doing high pay-per-view numbers and things like this, and I don't know what his percentages of the pay-per-views are, but I know usually the PBC guys, they get a set amount of money up front, and then they get back-end money off the fights, and Terence Crawford was getting a set amount of money, period. So I don't know what he was actually getting off of the pay-per-views, but I do know he was upwards of $4 to $5 million per fight. And, I don't see why he would have a problem with getting the biggest payday of his boxing career unless he really believes he might lose. Now, I think it would be a problem for him then, because at that point you got to either start thinking about rematches, cashing out of the sport, perhaps winning. He might win, but I would think the main thing would be on your mind would be, okay, if I feel like I don't have the talent to beat him, it would be, I need a rematch clause. I need the biggest purse that I can get in case the fans turn on me, and we don't get the turnout for the second fight that we did for the first fight because Errol Spence beat me too bad. But, this is realistic stuff that you have to think about in the process of negotiating a fight that you might not win, the biggest fight of your career, and, it's been dragging out this long. I don't understand why it's dragging out so long, other than he might truly believe he can't win this fight, and he wants to make sure he gets the highest purse he possibly can if he's going to go down to Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr. is a big welterweight, pretty much a middleweight at this point. And, Terence Crawford has an uphill battle to try to beat Errol Spence Jr. And a lot of it's his own fault. Like I've said before, he didn't put himself in the right position when he had it. He could be holding at least one more title at this point in his boxing career. He hasn't faced the highest level of competition. He hasn't pushed himself to the highest level, which could be a good and a bad thing. He could have preserved himself, from being in a few wars that he might have had to take to get that other title belt. Like the Ugas fight, he already lost to Ugas, so he might have had a war type fight with Ugas. He might have beat him, but he might have had a war-type fight and got beat up, pretty bad if he took on Ugas. We don't know why. What was his reasoning for not fighting Ugas when he had that chance? I'm gonna really I'm going to really come down hard on Terence Crawford if he doesn't agree to this fight at this point, because I think another year, 2 years, a year and a half would ruin this fight. It would ultimately ruin this fight, because these fighters are just getting older. What does Errol Spence do in the meantime if he can't make this fight? There's limited options in the welterweight division now. Now, it's still the best division in boxing to me. Well, besides 130. I think 130 is pretty stacked. But besides 130, I think the welterweight division is still the best division. It has some of the best talent. But the fact of the matter is that both of these guys are faced up with most of the good talent in the welterweight division already. So they're leaving themselves with limited options. So if they can't make this fight, where do both of these guys go after this? They're going to go separate ways and end up having to fight either a mandatory or choose an opponent. Who do they even choose from besides Booch and Virgil that would make them a decent amount of money to fight? There's only one name really, and that's Keith Thurman. They could make a decent amount of money off of. And then you got Boots, you got Virgil, you got Manny Pacquiao maybe, and then the list kind of tanks off, unless one of those guys face up with a lesser opponent that we're not thinking about, or that I'm not thinking about, and then decides, maybe a year from now, if they, it could possibly be a year from now before they make this fight. It could possibly be 8 months. They might fight somebody else and then fight each other immediately after that. We don't know. But at this point, the contract negotiation, I'm going to say, if it's not announced this week, this fight's over with. Because there's no way that Fox Sports, PBC, Team Spence are going to carry this out any longer. They have too many other options. Now, Errol Spence has more options because he can naturally go up in weight, because he's already sitting almost at that middleweight weight anyway. He's pretty much a middleweight anyway. So he has options of, I can go up, fight once at 154 or 160, and then come back down, because that might help him. Because I'm hearing that he's having a little trouble maintaining weight. When you're that big, it is hard to maintain weight. Terence Crawford, it's a little different from him, because he could either face some of the stiff competition that's on the come up at 147, or, there have been people in my inbox saying that he could go down in weight and fight maybe Josh Taylor, or Tank Davis, someone of that caliber, and then come back up in weight. The problem with dropping weight for Terence Crawford, it might not be that difficult, but there is a problem when it comes to dropping weight. Now, putting on weight when you're already a big fighter, it's nothing. Dropping weight can become a problem. Like if Errol, and here's the problem Errol Spence might have is, if he goes up in weight to 150, 160 and fights and then tries to drop back down, he could have a problem there. But if he goes up to maybe 154, that's not a big difference between 154 and 147. But 160, that's a lot of weight to put on, and then to try to drop it really quickly to fight Terence Crawford if the fight gets made next year or a year from now. And that might be Terence Crawford's plan. Like, hey, I control my weight better than he does, so perhaps I can get him in a situation where he puts on some weight and then drops weight, and then he's weight drained when I get him into the ring. So, there's a lot of things that could happen between now and whenever this fight's put together. Because we don't know when it's actually going to come to fruition. I'm hoping it within the next week, but it's not looking good. Let me know what y'all think. If y'all found any other news. As of right now, it looks like the negotiation process has fell apart. Now, Pacquiao, He said he was willing to fight Crawford if he's willing, and if the negotiations fall apart. So we'll have to see how that plays out. We'll have to see who they both decide on, who their next opponent will actually be. Hit that like button for me. Share, subscribe. Holler at me on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You're more than likely to get a response on tube, so holler at me over there. It's your boy, Cardinal Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me. And we are Manny.
If it wasn't one of theirs, this was your boy. Gas in the fuck ass stood over and took 4 more.